Welcome to KIMEcast, where we break through and cut the BS in sports medicine, rehabilitation, and sports performance, and talk about how things really work.
I started listening to the book because I feel like we're in that space where we're good, and now let's transition to great, right? What was the whole concept, right? And so there were a few things in there, like in the first two chapters and reading it or re-listening to it that I thought were interesting. One was level 5 leadership, which was exactly that. Do not micromanage, but the right people on the bus, right people, right seat on the bus. And then one of the other concepts was if you have the wrong person or the person's not fulfilling, then move them to a different seat first and do your due diligence, do your best job you can there to get the person in the right seat and see if you can find a better fit for them. But if that's not working, then do everyone a favor and don't drag it out anymore, but cut the cord because it's both good for you and for them. Let them go do something else fulfilling in their life because clearly working with you isn't going to give you that. It's not working. So cut it and move on. And it's a win for both, although maybe painful for someone at the time. It's the right choice to make. But it spoke to that idea that the right people don't need to be managed. The right people come motivated, they come excited, they're interested. They don't need these levels of management, which has been kind of our principle from day one. Like, let's find the right people.
Yeah, I think the concept of good to great, reading that book, I think it was one of my favorite books ever. And it really focused on constantly asking the question, what is our mission? What are we doing? And making sure that there is a good alignment from the bottom all the way to the top. And I think, oddly enough, the higher you go, the more servant you feel. And I think it's an important theme. Even though I don't recall reading the phrase servant leader in that book, it's now, in retrospect, plainly obvious that the best leaders are truly servants of the employees that are doing the great work.
Yep. Well, it talks a lot about that, actually. So he does say it in there. He goes, there's lots of different frameworks of leadership, servant being one of the frameworks. So he does speak to that. And he said they had to develop this term, level 5 leader. There's a term they developed because they said the leaders that they identified were not exclusively servants. And they were not exclusively other forms of leaders. So they had to identify this special type of pattern that they witnessed. They had to call it something that they hadn't been identified prior to. So that's why they went with this level 5. And then they developed a hierarchy, if you will, of those level 5. What is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5? And essentially level 5 is that servant leader. And the concept he described it as, best way to describe it, see if I can say it probably, was the window in the mirror. So when something great happens, look out the window and praise all of those. And when something bad happens, look in the mirror and take 100% ownership.
I mean, yeah, that's Jocko 101.
Yeah.
Extreme ownership too. I love that concept. And I think the challenge we have in both like industry and business and in teams and in sports and in doing what we do is to look at the business and try and to identify what is the score. We call it the scoreboard. Then that maybe is just one data point. And I've heard it many times on different social platforms of what's your North Star metric? What's the one score? And then right underneath that main score that says whether or not you won or lost that game, whether it's, a day, a month, a year, decade, what are the sub-metrics? And I think this is where we get into the overwhelming amount of data that's, presentable to the world. Thanks to technology, we can kind of see it all. In the health standpoint, you can look at HRV and resting heart rate and your muscle tone and your mobility and your conditioning. And we can look at 10 data points easily. We can look at another 1,000 if we just do a few tests. And what matters? What moves the needle? Is it your LDLs? Is it your resting heart rate? And if you don't have a way of simplifying business and health and life into just a handful of things that really move the needle psychologically and influence you and motivate you to do something today in this moment, then you kind of get lost by technology.
Yeah.
It's just way too much data.
Yeah. That was another thing on there that was mentioned. I mean, this book was written 20 years ago before there was quite as much data as there is now, but that was another topic, was this idea around reward, if you will. Like it's like for the executives, because they were studying executives in this book was the goal, but what the executives said that money really was a non-factor. So all these different incentive type plans, stock options and bonus pays, all these things, that at the end of the day, that money was not. It actually had no traceable evidence of being part of this shift from a company going from good to great compared to the companies that were good and failed. So he's like, it never showed up. We couldn't find it as much as we tried to find it. We couldn't.
It wasn't a separator between the great and the good, or the great and the mediocre. It wasn't a separator.
So there's a threshold. So you had to be above a certain threshold just to be in the mix. But beyond that, they had nothing to do with incentive programs or these details of like all of this like really like deep-rooted stuff. So I thought that was really interesting. Specifically in this book was at the executive level, but even still, I think it comes back down to like, what's your motivation? What's your why? What are we doing?
So in the book Flow, which I am constantly obsessed with, written by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, that's a hell of a name. It took me many tries to get that, and I probably still try.
Well done.
But a researcher back in the 90s out of the University of Chicago, and studied happiness and the pursuit of happiness at a very elite level. And what he'll call flow is the matching of skill and challenge. And as you talk, I like completely see his research embedded in what you just said, that the incentive was not a financial incentive that led to greatness. It was a drive within to find purpose. And that is exactly the flow state. And the flow state is to find a challenge where your skill set is barely appropriate for, and to work there because it is so influential on how we feel about our life. It's not comforting. It's not joyful. It's actually quite uncomfortable to be in that flow channel, but the outcome is winning the race. The outcome is winning, getting your all-star, pendant at the end of the year. It is a delayed reward that gives you the feedback that says everything I just did was worthwhile because I accomplished this monumental task, whether it's music or sports or business, and it's not money, because that's too superficial. Because what do you do with money? You just buy another couch or you buy another car. And I'm not going to work tirelessly for another car, but I am going to work tirelessly to find purpose in my life, which is not financially driven at all.
Yeah, this is why I think you can't give it to people, because they have to go find it. They have to find the purpose. They have to have that drive. And it speaks back to all of that stuff about micromanagement, all those little details, that you can't make someone do something. And the more you do it, then the more you become this kind of us and me situation where there's the leaders and then there's the employees, and it's like us against the management versus the frontline worker. And it doesn't work.
Yeah, it has to be within.
Yeah, it ends up dying. Like you can motivate for very temporary purposes and not going to be long term. So you truly have to find those that have the right passion that really want to do the work.
Well, I'll say this. I think when I first became a physical therapist in 2007, I was on the weekend, I was reading, but I wasn't working nearly as much as I am these days on the weekends. And not to say I spend work on the weekends. It's whenever it's like chill time, whenever my kids are reading their book and we have like a little bit of downtime on a Saturday, I will look at research and see how research is going to influence our next team testing, and then look at that team testing is that done the right way? Because if we can solve this problem, then kids can be healthier in their communities. And that's so exciting to do. I couldn't really do that as well 15 years ago because I don't think I had the skill set. That's the problem, is I didn't have the skill set to meet that challenge. But it took a few years of being in the industry. So now I feel very capable of helping with you and some of the leaders within our business to solve that problem. But I couldn't do it 15 years ago. 15 years ago, I was trying to read more books to raise my skill level.
Yeah, you got to raise skill level with that. And then you got to have some trial and error. You got to have some live failures, and I think that's so important that you have to challenge yourself in every industry, but you have to challenge yourself to fail enough. And then when you do fail, then you need to learn from that. And then that's what makes you stronger. I mean, I think that's one consistent thing we see in all champions across the board, as they say that they failed, countless times. Abraham Lincoln's a classic story. Jordan's got this great commercial on his legacy is insane. about failure and the fact that they took that failure and learned from it and then became what they became and made transformative change. But you got to be willing to put yourself out there and go fail. I think that's important. And fail with some grace, not just fall off the cliff, but have a structured approach and then maybe miss it slightly, right? And get moving in the right direction. And when they do sniper school training, they say aim small, miss small, right? So as they continue to get better and better with their aim, and they get tighter and tighter with their focus, they miss less and less, make small, minor adjustments, and they get able to hit targets at ridiculous distances away with all these different variables. But that's the key: is be willing to fail, be willing to challenge yourself, and then make some progress from it, learn from it, and get better. And the more tighter you can keep that window, I think the faster you learn.
I think, as you say, failure, I think a synonym, that's a nice word, is experience, and probably a cool word would be wisdom. You get wisdom through those failures, hopefully, when you self-reflect. And then
people say those nice words, they don't know what they mean.
Yeah,
people say, "Oh, you get more experience." Well, that just means I've been doing it for 10 years. No, that's not what that means. Although 10 years has been shown to be a very, very important number. But you have to go out there and actually do really specific work. This is the same thing in our field, right? It's like, oh yeah, I do sports medicine. Do you? Let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
Let's talk about athletes on the field at game speed.
Yeah.
Are you rehabbing that person? Coming live off the field, in the middle of their season? Are you talking to them about how to manage the injury?
Yeah.
Or are you dealing with somebody who has a knee injury, who was seen by a sports medicine doctor that's, 100 miles from the field?
Yeah, if you're doing sports medicine, you should be getting some text on Monday.
Yes.
Every Monday.
Yeah.
Because a lot of sports are played over the weekend, whether they're court sports in the wintertime and, field sports in the summertime and fall. You're getting that call on Monday.
Yeah, or right after the game. Hey, it was amazing. Here's my photo. I just won the championship trophy. That should be in your inbox for sure.
Yeah.
If you weren't there to watch it yourself.
Yeah. You get the right experience. And that just means I did said thing. Is you did it with purpose, with excellence in terms of how narrow of a focus you were getting. And then if you missed it, that just means that you were really focused on something quite small. And that's perfect. I think that might be the degree of excellence that you need, is to aim small, aim precise, aim to something that's really hard, like, getting an athlete back inside of, 5.5 weeks successfully. They were able to perform. They did it. They didn't get re-injured.
Yeah.
Aim big with people. And that means you have to, endure some failures, but you also have to read a healthy amount of books. You have to listen to your mentors. You got to find the recipes that have worked for many and then find your own path.
Totally. Like anyone could rehab a hamstring in the off season. That's not difficult. Give me 2 or 3 months, because in 5-6 weeks, they're going to feel better regardless of what I do.
Yeah.
And I'm going to discharge them, and they still got 6 weeks until camp starts. I'm not even going to know if they're actually ready or not, because they haven't done shit.
Yeah.
Even if they've gone out to the field and ran at whatever you would call 100%, it's still 80% of what they're capable of when someone's chasing them. So you haven't pushed them. So I'm pretty sure people didn't tear their hamstring running drills.
That's right.
It was in competition going 110%, extending their boundaries and their abilities to what it was. So yeah, you got them up to 80%. Congratulations. That's great. One of my first mentors, Darcy Norman, taught me that. He goes, Tony, you can get everybody back to 80%. The question is, can you get them to 100 or beyond? And that's always what's pushed me in the same category. But the question on a hamstring strain, can you get them back in 4 weeks in season?
Yeah.
Can you manage it during the season, get it recovered, and then get them back in a competitive environment where they don't re-injure themselves? Then you'll know if you did it right or not.
Yeah.
But most people aren't even in that situation.
Yeah.
They don't get that opportunity because they haven't done enough good work or developed enough community relationships to get that person sent to them.
Yeah. I mean, as you talk, I think, you're trying to answer what is a successful, person in this field, a successful physical therapist, a successful sports medicine specialist. And how do you judge yourself? I think if you really looked in the mirror and reflect on how good are you, if you got a real answer to that, most of us would just start reading more, listening more, finding another mentor, challenging ourselves more. And if we don't look in the mirror and don't have that hard conversation, then we might just think, I've been doing it for 10 years. I'm pretty good.
Yeah. Or, well, how do you be successful? How do you be successful without being micromanaged?
Yeah.
I mean, as we started the conversation, it's like, well, trying to get people to do certain kinds of work and certain things. And this is what you see in the corporate world, right? You see in our big therapy companies that have, multiple locations that you run more corporately, which is fine. But what all they do is they come down with numbers, see this many patients in this many hours in this many days, get paid this much amount of money. That makes decent sense. And then when you talk about managing that person, what you're managing to is data points, as opposed to what we're talking about. If I challenge myself to put myself out there to go make an impact on a community or a team and rehab someone in a smaller period and challenge myself to do that, well, it doesn't matter what the data is. My schedule will be full. It doesn't matter if there's 5 slots in the day or there's 40 slots in the day. It will be full.
Now,
Ideally, the right thing.
I think ideally, I would like that the game you create for me to participate in the business is similar to the game of life, of sports medicine and teams and people actually trying their best at whatever the activity that they find a flow state in. And if we can bring those and make those aligned, really similar, then it feels like I'm playing the same game. But if it's not, if I'm not aligned to the community, or I'm not aligned to excellence, or I'm not aligned to delivering or doing phenomenal work, I think that's where we're challenged.
Well, you should come work here then.
Exactly. Exactly.
Because that's the whole concept, right? Is that if you can make this whole life balance, this is always a great topic, like, what does that even mean? Most people can't define it. We've actually asked the team, like, what does it mean to be balanced in your life? And I don't think people really know what that means. They think that they should be asking for it.
Yeah.
But what they should be thinking about is like, hey, I love what I do. I love the impact I'm having. I see purpose in my life, and through my work does that, as well as my time with my family does that. There's no reason why they have to be completely separate things.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, because a balanced life, I think what's behind that phrase is I want a great life.
Right.
But then what does a great life look like?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Exactly.
Not balance. What those balance?
There's no such thing as balance. Any leader in the world that's had success will tell you there's no such thing as balance. Like, that balance 50-50 isn't what it is. It's being comfortable with the balance that you have, which might be 70-30 or 80-20 at different times or whatever it is. But the idea is that there's purpose behind what you're doing, and it's having impact, and it's making a difference in whatever you find valuable, whether it be in other people, in the community, whatever your field might be.
Well, what Mihail will say to achieve a state of flow is you need a construct, a game, rules to the game. Whether you're a marathon runner, a pool player, even probably a magician, you need rules. And then you need feedback. Without that feedback, I think when someone says I'm not appreciated, what they might mean is I'm not getting any feedback, neither positive or negative, neither constructive or praiseworthy. It's without feedback, we can't get into a flow state. And a flow state would say that this is a purposeful life. I'm living a life that at the end of it, I look back and say, yep, that was good. I'm ready to die now. Which I think is morbid, but so critical to have that thought.
No, we listened to that chapter when we started, that idea of it being morbid, and I think it's sometimes difficult but real. When from the E-Myth, it was one of the things he asked is, "What do you want?" And to answer that question, at the end of your life, if you look back, if it's at your funeral, people come up and have things to say, or someone reads the eulogy or whatever it is, what do you want them to say about you and your life? And start living towards that, towards that story that you want to be told, whether you're telling it or you're someone else tell it about you, whatever the case may be. But that's what it's about.
Yeah.
And when you can answer that question, then you can understand what brings you purpose, what brings you happiness, joy, how you spend your time, whatever your balance is.
That there's a shirt I saw over the spring break. There was a shirt, and I kind of like it, but then I kind of don't. And the back of the shirt says, "No one cares. Work harder." I kind of like it, but the what I don't like about it is it doesn't tell you got to pick the right ladder to climb. You have to work harder in the right way.
Yes.
There's no reason to just grind and do stupid shit. Do things that are meaningful, that meet the challenge that's appropriate for you. And I think that's really hard. A lot of people do not have a great sense of humility. They don't have a good, deep understanding of what they need to learn over and over and over to become great. I think maybe a little entitled. I think we all have a little bit of an entitlement to us. And we got to have a feedback loop that says, nope, you have more to learn. And if you don't have that feedback, you're not playing the right game. Because any game I've played, we all lose our fair share of games. And that's the whole point of a game, is there's a winner and a loser. If you're playing a game, a business game, a life game, that doesn't give you feedback that you're not good enough yet to what your standard is, it's hard to have that drive to get better. You need a feedback.
Yeah, I agree with that. I like that shirt a lot, but I do agree with you 100%. It's got to be in the right category. But what makes me think about that when you say like nobody cares, work harder, it means you don't feel either recognized or appreciated or something by somebody else for the work that you're doing. So the solution to that is that make people care. The reason why people like love or hate or whatever, they know who Elon Musk is because Elon's done shit. Like he like built an electric car that like no one had ever seen before. And it looked amazing, and it still dominates the market 10 years later, And, he's got space shuttles going up. He's digging holes with this boring company. I mean, like he bought X, like he's all over the place. He makes shit happen. Mm-hmm. So people know who he is, mm-hmm. and people do care. He doesn't have to work hard, but he works extremely hard to do it. But you think about it in every aspect. People don't care unless you show that you've actually done something meaningful. If you haven't done anything meaningful, then nobody cares, work harder. I guess. I get it. There's something that moves the needle, at least in somebody's life.
Well, I think in that way, I think some people can kind of get a little, the burnout comes from working harder in meaningless ways. And what would be meaningful to work harder? And that would be to pay attention. And we mentioned a lot of books. We've already mentioned like 4 books. I was gonna ramble another 2 more books, but I thought it was overkill. But that's the point, is to get different perspectives. And I think some of the best books I've written have been not related to health, not related to physical therapy. And it gives me this extra understanding of the world at large that then I apply those concepts in meaningful ways, and I grow and I expand my understanding, and that helps sharpen my work harder. Because the work harder doing what? See more people and treat more people is good, because I get a lot of experience by talking to people that are unwell and are injured and are diseased. And if you really stay curious about the person in front of you, you do learn rapidly. If you don't stay curious, then it was a waste of 30, 40 minutes. Yeah. But you have to stay curious. But that work harder, I think, is an important concept to drive yourself to be great. You have to pay attention.
Yeah, I love that idea about educating yourself outside of the field. If you're in our field, if you're in PT, from the beginning of my career, I've educated myself in every way possible outside of the field. Like most of the stuff I gained from an exercise standpoint was all from strength conditioning and performance enhancement work, and it was not really from, except Gary Gray and Gray Cook maybe, it wasn't very much from the PT community. It was very much from the exercise community and the fitness community and the strength conditioning community. And then I've read very few books on PT's business, because the ones that I've read are inaccurate. Frankly, they're not real. They're not authentic, and they're not real, and they're not written about business. Like maybe Pat Croce's book is written a little bit about business, and his story is phenomenal, where he was a PT working with some of the guys from the Philadelphia 76ers, and he told me, he's like, they were saying stuff to him, whatever. He goes, dude, one day I'm going to own this team. And they're like, dude, you're like a rehab guy. So he built what's now known essentially as NovaCare Physical Therapy into something and sold it and bought the 76ers. His book is worth reading. But most of the other stuff is about, run your own cash-based business and start your own thing and do this. And it's like, that's not a real business. If you read business books, if you read about what business is and what business should do, and what business is, it's not this like, yes, it's a capitalistic thing, but what it is, it's essentially a service. In our industry, it's a service to the world. And it's an organized way to deliver that service. That's what it is.
And with its own entity, with its own mission, with its own energy and vibe,
yes,
that you help steer.
Yes.
But it's a creation of its own.
Yeah, and you have a consistent delivery model where it allows you to reproduce the results, which is fantastic. If you can help somebody like a hamstring kid in 4 weeks get them back on the field, if I can reproduce that 500 times and have a whole team of people that could have the same impact I could have, well, that's freaking powerful. And does that produce money? Yeah, you bet it would, because a lot of people are going to want that. People will care because you made a difference. And I think that's the biggest thing I think educating yourself outside the field has been the best thing I've ever done, to really see like what is important and what does move the needle like in other parts of the world. Because I mean, our field, healthcare in general, it's a business disaster, and it's easily 20 years behind the times of other business models.
I think more than ever, young people moving into the space are going to have a hard time because they can ask the internet and the internet provides an answer. And if you ask the internet a business question, it's going to give you a culmination of averages. It's going to read everything that's been, written about the topic and say, here's a average answer for your quest. And what we're speaking to is broaden your wisdom by reaching out into those sectors, whether it's economics, whether it's maybe a health about sleep, and whether it's about longevity and age, and whether it's about business structure and human psychology and habit formation. And as you broaden your own wisdom in this canvas of understanding life, it allows you to lead. It allows you to do great things with your own personhood and influence people in front of you. And it's not a culmination of averages, which is going to be the answer online. So I know I cheat in a lot of ways. I use AI for a lot of kind of quick cheating tricks to help with time, but I don't use it necessarily to try and answer a big question. I use it to find more knowledge about a niche, and then I need to be creative enough in my solution to understand the bandwidth of my understanding to get more narrow and focus on the question and solve a problem. So I think we're at a risk of the averages of thinking, and you have to not have the averages of thinking of go down these little deep dives, or else you're gonna see our booklet, which says sleep 7 hours, sleep 8 hours. Cool, but it is important for the clinician to go down the deep path and read a book on sleep so that they understand the science behind you should really sleep 8 hours, because the phrase is just that simple. But you could go down a whole exploration to fully understand. And are we just going to be valuable enough to have these little one-off quotes? Are you just going to be a clinician of 50 quotes? Or are you really going to know?
Yeah, well, because that's where you're going to really impact, right? Are you actually going to, what about the person who sits in front and says, well, I only get 6.5 hours. Is that enough? Well, according to what I've read and what AI taught me, no, it's not enough. But if you really understood, you could start to granularly dive in deep as to be like, it is maybe for this case for you for X, Y, and Z, or maybe it's not, Who knows? If you live in a place where it's always in the sunshine, the end of one of the hemispheres, then maybe that makes more sense than it does if you live somewhere, where it's darker, more of an average time, whatever. But you start to can dive deeper into those things.
But when we still interview a lot of people because we're always hiring. But how many people, when we ask them to get an idea at least of their current knowledge base, we'd ask them a question. When you're at 3 months post-op ACL, what are the drills you're working on? And then they say we're working on knee stability exercises. Okay, go ahead. Tell me what that knee stability workout looks like. And they would kind of fumble. Once you ask the details, you gave me the quote. You gave me what the book says. What does that whole session look like from beginning to end? They just showed up. I'm going to do something. What are they going to do for the next 45 to 60 minutes? And that was really hard. And that's the person that doesn't have a deep understanding of stability and proprioception and motor control and strength and conditioning. They just have the little quotes that this is what we're doing.
Yeah, 100%. It takes understanding. I think we go back to looking at that from an exercise standpoint. It goes back to our philosophy. There's no good exercise. There's no bad exercise. It's just a matter of when's the right exercise for the right person. We interviewed someone the other day, and we talked about, what's their preferred choice of exercise. And it was, interviews, intervals on the Peloton, and it was doing Pilates. which is a great answer. But what came from that was how much the person had learned from Pilates and from doing those movements that was beneficial in their own life development, and even with their own clients. Is the statement became, I recommend all of my clients do Pilates. That's not the right statement. I have no problem with how great any of these things are, whether it's Pilates or powerlifting or doing sprints or playing football or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's fine, right? Then I take that person's body and put it into that and be like, are you already working on the things you're good at? See, it's easy to do the stuff you're good at, right? Like, just look at the yoga class.
Yeah.
Go into the yoga class and then just look around and see how many men are in the room. And there's probably a lot less, probably less than 10% of the room will be men. And then you go out into the weight room and then look at the dumbbell rack or the squat rack and see how many women are out there lifting weights. And you'll probably find that there's less than 10% of women out there lifting weights because it's not innately easy for them to lift, and it's not innately easy for men to go do flexibility. So if you only knew that about the human body, you could at least start to make some suggestions, though radical, to be like, hey, dudes, you should need to spend more time on flexibility because you're not very good at it. Now, you don't have to become a gymnast, but move yourself back on the spectrum a little bit so you have some freedom of motion, so you have some more, like risk tolerance. You have some more opportunities where if you're working in a very small zone, your risk is very, very high, because if you get out of that zone, you're smoked. You've never been there before. You need yourself injured. And then the opposite with females in very, very general sense. If flexibility comes easy to them, then getting some strength and balance in that is important. And then how exactly would you do it? Maybe I'd use some powerlifting tools to do that, or I'd use some Pilates-based tools to build strength in different ways. But that's what our job is to be like this exercise integrator, rather than, the last thing we want to do is be on some sort of a train that like we only do these things. Because unless you only are doing a certain population, like if you're in the NBA and all you have is NBA basketball players, even then you have to have 2 or 3 options because there's different kinds of players. But nonetheless, you can have a pretty small focus. But
I think we're citing some really violation of first principle thinking. One violation would be dogmatic. Oh, the way I've been doing it is the best. How hubris is that? Yeah. And another way is, well, this is what worked for me, so it'll work for you. I did Pilates and it fixed all my issues, so it must work for you, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, whether you're more of a dogma type person, you believe in it like a religion, or you have more of the anecdotal, which is just as bad. And then on the opposite of the spectrum, you have, now let's go back to the data field. Oh, I'm just going to test everything about you, and I'm going to get 500 data points, and we don't know. You're just going to believe me because I'm just the smartest scientist in the world. And if I can't narrow all that data to the most meaningful part of what's going to help you right now into one number, then I really lack the wisdom to use that knowledge effectively. So I think we're kind of coming, round circle here to now we're in the stage. I think years ago, there were plenty of clinicians that used the anecdotal model or the dogmatic model. And then now with how quick technology is ramping up, so I can have a force platform and I can have a dynamometer and I can use my phone and have you do some measurements, do some movements, and it's going to tell me all these things, and my tonal machine in my bedroom is going to tell me all of these things about me. And we're going to quickly go to the extreme of now there's 100 things to do. And really there's only like a few that
It's so simple. At the end of the day, it's so simple. That's it. There's going to be a lot of data, and it's important to be able to have that data and then look at it and be able to like understand what our strengths and weaknesses are of the person in front of you. But you have to give it, as we talked about this before, you have to give it context. Like, what is that person trying to do? Just what's right for the human doesn't make any sense. That's not the right question. What's that human doing? What's their life like? What is this so-called balance? All of those factors. This was epitomized with a client I had about 10 years ago. He was with the New York Giants, and he had pulled his hamstring in camp. And at that point, he lost a little bit of trust with the team because he was frustrated because he had just gotten with the team and just been drafted. And then this happens. He's like, shit, I want to go back to where I'm comfortable. So he came back and he rehabbed with us. And the Giants sent the strength coach from the Giants with him because he was a top prospect and they wanted to make sure that, hey, he's ready as soon as possible, right? So it was great talking with him. We talked a lot about the data, and they'd gone to this catapult system, which everybody has now in their jerseys and stuff, and these little GPS sensor tracking systems. And they'd been using catapult for like 2 years, and this was what he said straight up. He's like, we have so much data, we don't really know what it means. But he said, I could tell you this, that I would never be able to adjust this in the amount of time that I had. But looking back, if I look at this athlete, I could see a few things. He's like, first of all, he averaged about 2,000 yards a day in practice for the week. So maybe even 10 days, he was averaging about 2,000 yards per day. And then we had a practice day where he did 4,000 yards. We had another practice day where he did 4,000 yards. And then on the third practice day, right when he hit 2,000 yards, the next play is where he tore his hamstring. He's like, so I wouldn't have known that in the time, but now looking back, I can see that the athlete was conditioned for a certain level of work, and then we doubled that on back-to-back days. And on the third day, with no rest in between, he got to his threshold. Essentially, the tissue failed. And I think that's also understanding the athlete. There are some athletes who could tolerate that. This athlete's quite springy and quite explosive. So for him, there's not that much in the tank. It's very, very short term, very, very bouncy, which is extremely fun to watch and extremely electric on the field. But it's not necessarily someone who's in the grind, of the offensive line where they're playing every play, every down the whole game. Is not how these guys operate. So it was really interesting, again, knowing what did your guy do, what position are they in, what is their load tolerance, all of that kind of stuff. Data can be important, and it can really tell you a lot, but there's so much out there that you don't know what to do with it.
If you're not rooted in deep principles, if you're not rooted in a fundamental understanding of what is your goal and what are the buckets to look at, you're going to be lost. It's going to hit you like a ton of bricks. I don't think that the typical rookie in this space, even when they've read a paragraph in a book that says you should look at these 3 numbers, they just don't have the wisdom to make good use of that. Not to say a rookie can't be successful. I'm not saying that. Hopefully I was a moderate success when I was a rookie. But when you do have success, you have to reflect on it. And when you have failure, you have to reflect intensely about it. Because if you don't develop those principles and a deep understanding of those first principles quickly, and by first principle, I mean when you stretch, what are you stretching? When you work on your nervous system, exactly what's happening. Is the myelin growing around that area? Are you improving the synergy through all the muscles that need to work in that space? When you do a full range lunge or a full motion Turkish get up, what joints are moving through their full articular space? And are you exemplifying good stability control? You have to really kind of ask these questions. What am I doing with this thing? And if you can answer biomechanically, physiologically, from an adaptive standpoint with programming, now you're really starting to understand how the system works, how it rehabs, how it performs. And then you can, take some numbers and understand. But if you don't have that deep dive, it's just too hard. It's too much, And then, what I'm going to do? I'm going to say, this worked for me. I became a kettlebell instructor. You should really do kettlebells.
That's it. You just start. That's the worst thing we can see happen in this profession. Is we just start throwing stuff at people like, oh, well, let's try to do a little cupping. Let's try to do a little massage. Let's try to do a little bit of this Pilates exercise routine, or let's try to do a little kettlebell work and do that because that worked for me, or I saw it work for somebody else, and let's see what works. It's like, no. This should not be how this goes. There should be a process of which you understand the basis of how the body works. If you're curious, like you were saying a moment ago on new people or rookies, they can be extremely successful, and the ones that are curious. And they ask enough questions and they engage with their client in front of them enough to dive deep enough to learn. And the answer will almost be obvious. The patient will say it to you 100%. They might even identify when they say it, oh, that's what it is. And then all you have to do is help them fix that problem, whatever that might be. Then you have to understand there's kind of a basis list of problems. When we developed the pyramid in our company, is like, this is a basis of problems. This is how the human body in general works. And if you don't fill the bottom of the pyramid with life's requirements, food, water, combined, it would be nutrition, sleep, stress management, daily activity like just walking or basic aerobic exercise. If you're not filling your bucket with that thing, then what you just went to, this really detailed level of movement and quality of movement in science, won't matter if this isn't there. So you have to ask enough questions, be curious, get that foundation layer, then get this really high level of detail, and then you can really impact someone's elite level performance. Unless one of the lower levels is like a really obvious deficit that you could, quickly adjust, which happens at times, but is rare. It's not as common. But if you can identify it and give them a plan to fix it, that's where you're gonna really see those gains. But be curious, go out there and learn, figure out what's going on with the person in front of you. Ask questions. That's how you're gonna learn. That's what's gonna then motivate you to grow. We've always in our company, we always wanted two things out of a person: someone that could communicate, because they're going to be curious, and they're going to figure out, they're going to ask questions, they're going to learn more about the person in front of them, and then someone who's passionate. And if someone's passionate, because they can communicate and ask some questions and learn, they're going to then take that, and if they don't have the answer, they're going to be passionate enough to help that person in front of them, that they will then go read something, or they will go ask somebody, or they will go learn and develop a skill to then come back and serve, and then they will have moved up the ladder in this experience category, where they're becoming more skilled and they're going to actually do something valuable.
Yeah, that's it. I think a few data points just to, when we talk numbers, in our company, we ask a PT probably to meet a new person every day, which means in a month, about 20 in a month, or about 240 in a year. Yeah, 240 in a year. And so if you're meeting 1,000 people every 4 years, then a common question we get from rookies coming out of school, or from people who are, living more green, what's the timeline? What's the timeline for me, to be good, to be great? And I think we've seen it a few times where great PTs can be established inside of about 3 years, with an absorption of a lot of education and a lot of reflection and a healthy amount of reading and attendance to workshops and such. And so then what's the reps? And it's kind of like that 700 to 1,000 people. And if you haven't helped, around that number, then you're still learning. We're always learning, but I think there's a lot of room to grow. I think in the law of diminishing returns, that inflection point might be like around 1,000 people, as long as you've learned from 1,000 people, not just treated 1,000.
Yes.
Did you really learn what drives them, their issues, their limiting factors? Dialed in a progression, had them be compliant with a progression,
yes,
because they believed you.
Yeah.
If you've learned from 1,000 people, that might be enough to really, really be great.
Yeah, I've heard you say to people that, you just don't know enough people yet. which is the fierce way of saying that to someone, but that's true. And I think that last point is really important. We see sometimes people want to blame, the patient or someone that they didn't do what I asked them to do. Well, that's, again, probably your fault. You then ask them either to do too much, considering their life and not understanding what all is in their life of how they would get it done, or two, you didn't explain it in such a way where they understood it and saw it was valuable. So again, work harder, nobody cares kind of an idea. Like, you didn't make them care about it. And then therefore, and if you don't make them care about it, they don't do the stuff, then the feedback you're getting is inaccurate and doesn't really allow you to grow. So you getting them to get buy-in and get engagement helps you tremendously, because then you learn from that. That's the best thing I've ever learned working with professional athletes. It's the learning curve is really fast with them. One, because they typically do what you say, because you're usually doing it with them, because you have these ungodly amount of time with them. And two, is the body responds so damn fast for them that if you give the right intervention, it changes in an instant. It's like, whoop, one day it was this, next day it's better. And it's there. And when you get a chance to do that, you really get to hone into okay, this manual therapy technique does work because I've used it on 5 different people, and all 5 of them it was better on. So when you go do that technique on the next person and it doesn't work, it may not be that you did the technique wrong. It might be that you chose the wrong technique. You didn't diagnose the problem properly. So then it takes you back to the step 1. But if you're just aimlessly doing the same stuff on everybody and you're not really paying attention to that, then you're not going to grow in the process. You're just going to be running through it.
Yeah, you don't have good feedback.
Yeah, because your feedback loop is terrible.
Yeah. If at each person, going back to the metrics and the business, the North Star metric, what's the single most important measure? I think we all need that. If I'm a patient coming in and, I'm seeing you because my hip hurts, hopefully you're saying this is the most important thing. And then maybe you have 2, 3, 4 other things that we'll get to. but there should be one. I should leave with understanding like I can't do that, and my PT wants me to learn how to be able to do that thing, and that becomes their North Star metric, the most important limiting factor at this moment in my life today.
Yes.
And I've actually loved whenever I rehab my own injury, I usually do one exercise.
Yeah.
And it's like an interesting, fun game. What is the most important thing? I'm just going to do the shit out of that thing. And that's one, you really validate whether or not it was correct.
Very true. No, that's actually a great practice to have. More exercise is typically not the answer. You know, it's definitely. But I will say there's usually not one magic bullet either. That's not the right thought process.
That's right. I didn't mean to. Yeah. Because it's
not what you're saying. Totally, I get it. But just to be clear, that's not what you should be searching for. Is if I do this one exercise, it'll solve my problems. I promise you, it won't.
Not the red pill, not the blue pill, not the yellow pill.
Yeah, that won't do it. I've been doing this for long enough and gone to enough seminars and enough people talking about, oh, do this thing and it fix. No, it doesn't work like that. Any intervention will help probably 70 or 80% of the population. But that's the reason why it doesn't help 100% is because it's not needed for 100%. The human body they're either different or responds differently to different stimuli. So you have to have variables in your approach and in your skill set to give it something different.
Therein lies the difficulty of the Pareto principle is we fall prey to that, 20% of our exercise choice helps 80% of people. So I get used to doing very few exercises for a lot of people until it doesn't work. And if I don't pay attention and if I'm not razor sharp with my diagnosis, I'm going to miss those outliers, whether it's 10%, 15%, 20% of those outliers. They need something that is not within my normal bucket. And that's exactly how the life of a PT is. You know, I choose like 10 exercises most of the time, but then my other exercise choices are extremely random and weird. And you know what? For this person, it makes sense. And if I don't have that bandwidth to pull from, I will lose it on 20% of the people. And that's not gonna go well.
As you say that, that's actually super interesting because I think that this feedback loop is a broken part of our healthcare system. We have to be super careful with it. And if you have the ability to partner up with the right people to close your feedback loop, it is amazing. Not only the right PTs, mentors, but I'd say physicians too. Because that happens so often that like the information given by the physician, not to say physicians are bad or in any way, but in certain situations, sometimes information provided by the physician to the patient or what the patient heard the physician say or whatever it might be, was interpreted in such a way where it's counter to what you thought, and then therefore your thoughts are dead and the patient is still left with no solution and you kind of didn't get anywhere, where you may have been right, but there was just somewhere it was lost along the way. I'll give you an example. We had this guy today. I saw him this morning. He's 3 months out now on an ORIF of a fibular fracture. And he actually is a Major League Baseball scout. So he's familiar with big leagues. He played previously, so he's very familiar with the process. But he was hurt away from work. He was hurt on his own time and went to his own doctor, had the surgery, and then the doc's like, okay, we're going to put you in a boot and no physical therapy. So he goes in the boot for 6 weeks, and I had rehabbed him for a shoulder in the past. So like 5 weeks, he reached out to me. He's like, hey, he hasn't told me to start PT yet, but I feel like I should. I'm getting really stiff. And if I was talking to my team, I know they would have me in like on week 1. I know that our guys are getting rehab like right away. He's like, so I don't understand like why I'm not getting rehab. And I'm like, I would agree we should probably get it right away, but we need to be careful. There's things, we want to allow the healing process to happen. So he's non-weight bearing in the boot 6 weeks. And then at the 6 week mark, no way, the doctor said, no, I don't want you to do any therapy. You're not going to need any therapy for this. So I want you to go, you're going to stay in the boot for another 4 weeks. And then at 12 weeks, we'll fully get you out of the boot and you'll be fine. You won't need anything. So 12 weeks was last week. We went ahead and started therapy at the 6 week mark because it was best practice to do so. And I completely disagree with that recommendation. And he, as the patient, was like, I'm so stiff. And I'm like, you are, because you haven't done anything. So let's get this thing moving, and now he went to see the doctor last week for the 12-weeker. And he'd been doing this stuff the whole time. And the doc's like, man, you're really stiff. And he's like, yeah. He goes, I started PT and we're starting to work on it. And he's like, well, is your PT doing ultrasound? And he's like, no, they don't have ultrasound. He's like, I thought they did like sports medicine. And he's like, they do. And then he's like, well, how often are you going? And he looks at him and he goes, you told me not to go at all. And he's like, but I'm going like once a week. He goes, well, you need to be going like 3 times a week. And in that moment, the patient's like, fuck you.
Yeah.
You don't know what the fuck
This
you're
is
talking
my
about.
life and my leg, and you just did that to me?
Yeah, you just told me not to do anything for 12 weeks. Then you came in and started asking all these detailed questions about therapy, which you were never going to prescribe and told me I didn't need 6 weeks ago. And now all of a sudden you need 3 days a week. Mind you, because he's a scout in the major leagues, he travels for 10-day windows all over the world.
Wow.
So how is he going to do this PT for 3 days a week that you said he didn't need? But when he was off work in January, when he wasn't traveling and scouting, would have been an ideal time to maybe start this process.
Wow.
So this is the problem in the industry, is that there's idiots who haven't taken an understanding of how healing works. First, that was obviously a loss of understanding of healing by the physician, a lack of trust in the industry, which I support, because a lot of times we haven't shown anyone there's a reason to trust therapy or any other healthcare provider for that matter, case in point. But this is what we have to be careful of, is that there's a lot of bad advice. And it's kind of tough. Like, I mean, even with myself, with my experience and what I've seen, I felt 1,000% confident in what I was doing. But I was being challenged by a physician who was 1,000% the other direction. And that's not a good situation to be in with the patient. I don't want the patient to be there. So, I mean, I sided with the physician at first. I'm like, hey, we'll take it easy. It's fine. And it was fine. It's not going to be a huge issue, but it is going to drag out his situation longer than it should be. Because throughout the whole process, he was very afraid to make progress because the doctor told him, whatever you do, don't do too much. And I'm talking about doing like 4-way ankle and like some ABCs and like some seated heel raises. I mean, we're not even putting weight to this thing. Like, come on. Anyway, bone's much stronger than that, as previously discussed, but especially when it has a freaking screw, 4 screws and a plate. It ain't going anywhere. But nonetheless, you have to get your feedback loop with doctors you trust that you can work closely with. And that will really help you expedite your growth, is my point of that. Because then you get
and with trainers and with coaches,
yes,
and with parents and with the community at large. Without a feedback, there's no growth.
Yeah.
And if you don't have honest conversations with your patients, there's no growth.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, good luck out there.
Yeah.
Take this and run with it. Thanks for listening.